The video series Glycemic Control was developed by the Georgia and Oklahoma Academies of Family Physicians as part of the Go Diabetes initiatives. The Glycemic Control series consists of 5 video vignettes, each outlining best practices in the care of diabetic patients. Please proceed to the registration page for more information on the approved number of prescribed credits for this activity as assigned by the American Academy of Family Physicians and AMA PRA Category 1 credit as assigned by the Georgia Academy of Family Physicians. Upon completion of each video vignette, please return to the Resources video page on the Go Diabetes website to complete the activity evaluation and earn your CME. This activity is supported in part by an educational grant from Sanofi Aventis. We thank you for participating in this online activity and hope it serves as a valuable educational tool.
NPH insulin, it's less expensive. That's its main advantage. Disadvantage, you have more low blood sugar. You know, people when they take NPH insulin often take it at dinner, and when they take it at dinner, it peaks at about, and this is true for like 75-25 or 70-30, it peaks at about 2 or 3 in the morning, which is not a good time for insulin to peak. That's usually when your insulin requirements are the lowest. This was an interesting study that compared Lantus to NPH. These were type 2 diabetics that were on 2 pills, or 1 or 2 pills, and not reaching A1C recommended targets. You can see their A1Cs were between 8 and 9%, and they were on metformin or sulfonylurea. And they put people on either glargine or NPH, and you can see over a period, I think the NPH was dosed BID in this study, but they both brought their A1Cs down to about 7. But you had more, this is patients with greater than 1 hypoglycemic episode. You had more hypoglycemia with the patients who took NPH versus the ones who took Lantus. Okay, so that was the advantage that you saw. Now, since you saw that, you would also predict what I tell you. If you have more hypoglycemia, you're going to have also more blood sugar lowering probably, and you're also going to have more weight gain. And just always keep that in mind if you hear a drug rep talking about that. This is just a slide that shows the kinetics of each of these insulins, regular insulin versus NPH, which are kind of the old standbys that a lot of people are familiar with. Compare that to the rapid insulins. These are monomers versus Lantus, which is a hexamer. These are absorbed almost immediately from the time they're injected. So examples, Apidra, Novolog, Humalog, okay? So these are the insulins that you give when the food's sitting in front of you. You don't give it and wait 30 minutes like some people would do with regular. But their onset of actions within about 10 to 15 minutes, they peak at about an hour and a half and wear off over about 2 to 3 hours. Compare that to glargine, which glargine right here is really peakless. There's no peak at all with it, and lasts close to 24 hours. And then compare that to detamir or levemir, which there is a bit of a peak. And that's why some people will dose this BID to try to avoid that peak. All right, so we're going to normalize the fasting glucose. And then the next question we say, have we met our glycemic goal? Is our A1C 7? If not, then your options, you got to normalize your postprandial glucose because you normalized the preprandial and the fasting, but you haven't normalized the postprandial. So options, you could dose your NPH twice a day. You could go to a premixed insulin, which gives you both a mealtime coverage and a basal coverage, or you could add one of the monomeric insulins, Apidra, Novolog, Humalog, to your basal. You've seen this slide before, but it's just to reinforce that, and I would see this quite a bit, residents became very comfortable starting basal insulins. But once started a basal insulin, then often, and they weren't reaching their glycemic targets, and then it's like, wow, now what do I do? That's kind of what sometimes would happen because it becomes more complex. And just remember that once you get your A1C down into this range, you're dealing, a lot of what's causing that blood sugar to be elevated is your postprandial glucose, and you've got to deal with that. If they've got some beta cell reserve and their pancreas can still make insulin when they eat, then they're going to be able to handle that. If they can't, then you're going to have to give them insulin for it. And that's where these monomeric insulins come in. These are the ones absorbed immediately. You give it just before the meal. They probably are a little bit safer because they really mirror the absorption of glucose from the stomach more closely than what like regular insulin does, okay? A lot of patients prefer them over regular insulin because you don't have to wait that 30 minutes, you know, like with regular, say, okay, I'm gonna be eating in 30 minutes, I'm gonna take my insulin so I can get ready, because it takes at least that amount of time for it to start kicking in. Whereas with the monomers, you just inject it and start eating. Or you can even, some people even dose after they eat. The duration of action, it covers postprandial glucose surge well. We talked about that. Just remember that if somebody has type 1 diabetes, then they're going to need a basal insulin in addition. Now, this is a new, I put this in because I thought we didn't do a very good job talking about type 1 and starting insulin. When you diagnose somebody with type 1 diabetes, when you start them, they usually still have some beta cell function, and they go through what's called a honeymoon phase where they'll still require, or they'll still make some insulin, particularly when you start giving them insulin. They've got so much glucose toxicity. Are you guys familiar with that term? Once glucose, it's kind of like the Starling curve for the pancreas. You know, the pancreas makes more and more and more insulin, and eventually it just stops because it's just pooped out. It's kind of what happens with heart failure. You know, you give more preload, eventually, you know, it compensates, and it's like, and then heart failure ensues. And so it's kind of the Starling curve for diabetes is what glucose toxicity is. But newly diagnosed type 1s require between 0.2 and 0.4 units per kilo per day. And most type 1s, I would argue, and I think the evidence would back me up on this, that they need to be on a basal bolus regimen when you start them. I wouldn't put them on like a split dose, like a 75-25 or 70-30 dose. It's just not very physiologic for those patients. And you're using the same goals. You want to normalize the fasting glucose and you want to normalize the postprandial glucose. Okay, so fasting's about 100, 2-hour postprandials less than 200. Okay, that's what you tell your patient. You know, the specific numbers, okay, 90 to 130 in 2 hours less than 180. But if you're getting those numbers at those ranges, then you're going to have an A1C of 7 or less. After their honeymoon, and this is, of course, after they've been diagnosed for a while and their beta cells stop making insulin, they're going to require between 0.6 and 0.7 units per kilo per day, and you're going to split that dose between basal and bolus insulin. We're going to talk, the basal part's easy to calculate. You know, you're going to do whatever. You could do 0.3 units per kilo of basal and 0.3 of bolus, but how do you know about the bolus? And I'm going to talk to you in just a second about how to figure out the dosages on the bolus insulin. This is a slide that I got from Up to Date. So for those of you with access to Up to Date, it's in there, and it just shows the different options for insulin in type 1 diabetes. The R stands for regular, N stands for NPH. Let's see, we talked about that. The VRA is very rapid acting, and that's the monomers, Apidra, Novolog, Humalog. G is glargine, D is detamir. So any questions? So basically what they're advocating, multiple daily injections, and is what that, and that's in there for your reference. For those of you with access to that, you can find that on your own as well.